Last year, at the beginning of the year, stories start emerging. In fact, I remember the first time we looked at that story here, and we're like, there's something that's happening in Kilifi.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's a chief who is holding some person because this woman was found to have been starving her children in a house. And we're like, what? And because she belongs to some cult that is saying if you starve yourselves to death, you will go to heaven. And this will be ahead of sure damnation that's coming. So the best thing to do is go before this thing comes. And that's what she was doing. And we thought, this is completely bizarre. And then the stories continued. And Shakahola emerged. And there's been a Shakahola issue. And it became a whole different story. Investigations are ongoing. There's a court case that started. And then the president set up a task force to look at this issue that is surrounding religion. How can we avoid this happening again in the future? So he set up a task force, and this task force was led by the Reverend Mutava Musyimi, who's our guest today, because yesterday the task force presented its report to the president. Reverend Mutava, karibu sana.
Asante.
It's good to have you on the Situation Room. Finally, we have invited you a number of times. You're a busy man. Nowadays, you do very many things. Since you left Parliament, and before that, when you were serving as clergy, and even before that, during all that time in the agitation for the rebirth of this country. Now here you are. Never say never. Mutava Musyimi is on the hot seat of the Situation Room. Welcome.
Thank you.
To welcome you, CT will give you the day's proverb. Every week, CT goes to one African country. He mines proverbs from that country, and then he brings a proverb a day from that country. The next couple of weeks are going to be landlocked countries in Africa.
Yes.
And we've started with?
We started with the Republic of Burundi. Next week, we will go to Botswana.
Okay.
Yes. And then we will continue in alphabetical order. Yes.
Reverend, have you been to Burundi?
I think so. Been to Kigali? No,
That's Rwanda.
When I went there,
have you been to Bujumbura?
No,
okay.
I don't think I have. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
That's a sign of a man who's traveled greatly.
Yeah.
And has to wonder,
where was this?
Was that? Okay. Where there is no jealousy, a small hair's leather is enough to cover 4 people.
Where there is no jealousy, a small hair's leather is enough to cover 4 people. Hair here is the rabbit, the wild rabbit.
The long-eared one.
Sungura mjanja.
Not the bunny cute rabbit, the other one with the long ears.
Sungura mjanja. What's your interpretation of that proverb? What do you think they're telling us?
What does it? What
actually, the mitiani. This is simply, should we say, a way of introducing you to how to share with our many listeners your view of life. Because when you interpret it, you can't possibly be wrong, because it's your interpretation.
I'll go with yours.
Thank you so much. And what is mine again?
When you hear it, when you just hear it, what comes to mind? Where there's no jealousy.
First of all, I was trying to figure out leather. What's that?
Leather. Ngozi ya sungura.
Now, you see, now that's clear.
Where there's no jealousy. Ngozi ya sungura. Small.
Not foam.
Not foam.
Yes.
A small ngozi ya sungura is enough to cover 4 people.
Where there is no
jealousy.
Very profound. That is very profound.
The people who have studied theology, from what I have observed, because I know some, one of the things they do, they study philosophy. And so they pontificate on issues. And we would like you to share with us the end result of this pontification, the profundity. Just your simple thoughts on the matter. It doesn't have to be very elaborate.
We're here because of Shakahola. I will answer you indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
When the bomb blast happened in 1998,
Yes.
NCCK was in Church House.
Yes, it
I was then General Secretary. It had been there since 1954. The house was put up by CMS. It was then the tallest building in Nairobi. So we were there for a long time until the bomb blast happened, over 40 years later. And we lost staff. I lost staff, others we lost to injuries. 220 Kenyans died. Next week, Wednesday, is the 26th anniversary. Cut long story short, we set up a trauma center in NCCK, got quite involved. Jonjo then was the chair of a certain assignment he had been given by President Moi, they had made up. So we led a big service at Uhuru Park with President Moi, Jonjo, all the churches, mosques, and so on. And then we involved ourselves with other sites that had been involved in situations similar to ours.
Mm-hmm.
So one day, I'm sitting in Church House, and we have a team from Oklahoma. This is a city that had suffered a serious tragedy 3 years earlier, 1995.
Yes, they had.
And each one of them tells their story. There's a tall gentleman seated there who gives a story, and this is what he says. I'm here because of my wife. So we got a bit intrigued. And she's not alive. And she's not alive because she was affected by the bomb, but because she had friends who died who were colleagues in the federal building in Oklahoma. Because McVeigh had issues with the federal government. That is the chap who planned all these things and executed it. And when my wife's friend died, she found it difficult to live. She couldn't face life. She committed suicide. And so I'm here to say trauma is deep. My wife was not affected. Her friends were affected. She couldn't live without them. It was too much. So I'm here. Where the Sungura comes in, you have to tell me. But I'm trying to say, they came to share a story of people who had suffered like them. And I thought, I don't think this society, even the government as I listen, has come to terms with the trauma of Shakahola. We went to the site. It was the first thing we did after we were appointed. And we were there for the whole afternoon. And on that particular day, there were 13 bodies, many of them children and women, very few men. By the time we finished, nobody was talking to another. We'd been asking, where was government? Where was government? Then one of the civil servants faces me and says, Reverend Musyimi, where was the church? So back to the bomb blast, and then Westgate, then Garissa University College, then Dusit. Where was the religious sector? Where was the government? And that quietly, as the chairman, became, for me, the issue. The report we give must speak to that question that was asked by ourselves and by this gentleman in Shakahola. Where was the religious sector when Shakahola happened, when bomb blast happened, Garissa, Westgate, and so on? And where was the government? And so, this is our story. This is our story. I was told this morning that people in Kawangware are very excited about this report. Somebody told me, who is well informed, he was walking up and down huko akaniambia watu. People there are very happy about the regulations that are being put, because there are many these sort of preachers in Kawangware and many other Kawangwares. People get into a bus when you are going to Busia and they begin preaching not to you but at you. Then they want sadaka. Then wakimaliza, they share with the right people, and you're basically you've been ambushed by this preacher. And so we are dealing with a phenomenon with very many horns. And so if we follow your Proverbs, sir, and we begin sharing what we can share that is good for our people, either as individuals, as communities, religious groups, part of government, anything that helps de-traumatize a country that I think is facing many, many challenges and is traumatized from very, very many corners.
Reverend, was Shakahola a religious matter?
I'm not sure I know enough about the Shakahola incident itself. If you recall, there was a commission appointed that was supposed to be headed by Justice Lesit, I think. And then it was ruled illegal only the other day. It never quite started.
Yeah.
So that was supposed to investigate the question that you are asking, the detail of Shakahola as an incident. But that never happened. At some point we will know. But back to your question, I think there are very many factors in Shakahola. I don't think you can look at Shakahola from only one angle. In terms of there are sociological issues. There are people who are very vulnerable because they are poor. And so somebody comes in and they preaches and they see hope for their child who is sick. They are a single parent. And then they invest what they have. They go to Shakahola to start a new living, to buy a piece of land that they can start. And then they get locked into a situation they hardly understand. And before too long, they are burying somebody or they themselves are dying. Then there's failure of reporting because that's the government side. Then you are dealing with lack of a legal framework for those good-minded civil servants who want to apprehend these so-called preachers, and they can see they are not just preachers. And there isn't the enabling statute to make it possible for them to do what they want to do. And we visited all the counties, and we visited. We had sessions with all the county commissioners privately, and with the police commanders and the intelligence. And we got information from the government side, and you can see government has information, but it is handicapped. Because how do they implement? Government needs the law, the statute, to be able to do its work. So there is that side. And we thought that was our job to make a proposal to government and say, here you are. And so, I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Another question, and there's a marrying of the two, because, for sure, one could see that there's a possibility that religion was the genesis of a lot of the things that came out of Shakahola, because people were invited to a church, they became members, or at least to this ministry or whatever it really, really was. And as a result of that, the things that we saw came about. Now, if you go to the other thing where you mentioned that to really understand and then be able to legislate around matters, you must understand the horror of what really has gone on in Shakahola. And we who see the details every day, I don't think we've seen the half of it. I don't think we've seen really, really what has happened. By the time you're exhuming bodies of folks who've starved to death, we even hear stories of people who had not quite died and they were buried. If you put the two together, here you're talking about somebody who invited people to his church and as a result of that, starved themselves because they felt that was a gateway to heaven, who wanted their children to be healed and starved them as well. And then on this other hand, where we're talking about using religion to do so, but then understanding what really happened here. Because here you are, Reverend Musyimi, and you're saying, okay, well, based on all of this, and this being one of the factors, there is a need to really regulate what happens with religious organizations in the country. Is there not a similar thread running through here that then results in what you're doing today, whereby a report has come out yesterday?
What are you asking?
Is it not that religion actually was the issue? Or at least the genesis from where all of this came?
Of course, religion was the entry point. But you cannot really understand Shakahola from just that perspective of religion. It is the entry point, in my view. There are people who went because they were looking for land. There are 2 acres. Because there was cheap land in Chakamaranj. And they went in good faith from Kisii, Vihiga, from other places. And they found themselves victims of this. So there is the economic angle. There is, of course, the charismatic angle of these leaders who are very, very... I mean, they know how to engage. And they know how to attract their victims, because they are really victims. These are not followers, these are victims.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about very able preachers, you're talking about very vulnerable followers, victims. But I agree with you, there is the religious angle. And that's why we are saying standards need to now be discussed. We need to tighten the screws as to organizations that get registered. There's a lot of work, but that has to be done within the context of freedom of worship and association. We have had long discussions with the churches, especially, and the solution to that is through umbrella bodies, which can also be manipulated. Kenya being what it is, you can easily have a group of people who get together and they create their own umbrella body, and then they continue doing their own thing. And that's why we are saying, much as we see there is freedom of worship and association, and that these religious leaders have recommended umbrella bodies, be careful. They can also be manipulated.
How would you know,
exploited.
Reverend? How would you know? For example, if you're going to regulate or give the license to somebody, or now that we've been hearing that everybody who now operates in Kenya might have to have that license reviewed, or, we're going to look at you again, how would you know? I mean, is there kind of a spiritual intervention that takes place and you can say this person is off their rocker? Because some of the testimony that we have from people who survived this horror, they would say, well, Mackenzie was he was a man with gravitas. The way in which he spoke to people, you would never in your life imagine that he was going to go left in any way. So if we're going forward and saying there must be regulation, there must be a revisitation of all of these things, how would you know that somebody would say something to you today and then it's not going to lead a movement where it's going to starve half its people to death? How would you know that?
That's why we have recommended a hybrid solution. Don't just leave it to the umbrella bodies like NCCK, Evangelical Fellowship of Kenya. You need to create a religious affairs commission. We're proposing be woman by 9 people, 5 of whom come from the religious sector, but also people from government, intelligence, and so on, so that commission has certain responsibilities with respect to registration, because government has a lot of information. And if it is brought to that platform, and there is a question raised about a certain person who wants to register a church, and there are issues, you have the intelligence. So it is a religious sector quasi-government body, where government brings its intelligence, it has the capacity to enforce, but the religious sector brings in its religious instinct and insight and sensitivity and discernment. And when you bring the two together, then you are now you are in a space that makes it safe, makes it possible for the Kenyan people to feel safer with the religious organization or umbrella bodies that are registered,
so
because they have been vetted by a body that has capacity and the competence.
So before, for example, when we heard that Mackenzie had a TV station, right, and he used to send some of these messages on TV which were, quite colorful and sketchy, and they shut down his station. The call at that time, should there have been this body, regulatory body in place, would have been, there's no way we're going to give this fella a license to operate a church based on these things that we're saying he's saying on TV. Would that be the kind of thing that you would take into consideration with the information?
Yeah, in fact, we recommended an amendment to the Act, Communications Act, so that it gives the law makes it possible for what you are seeking to happen, to protect the vulnerable. So there is a whole raft of changes that need to be brought to the statutes that exist.
At the beginning of this, I just want to look at what your task force came up with as conclusions and recommendations. So first of all, the conclusions. Number one, you said religious organizations play a vital role in shaping the socioeconomic and moral fabric of the Kenyan society. Although the Constitution guarantees the freedom of religion association, the society has witnessed incidents where religion has been used in a manner that is detrimental to individual health and safety, the public interest, and national values. There is therefore need to strike a delicate balance between safeguarding the freedom of religion and association and the imperative to protect the public good. And then you also say there is need to undertake policy, legal, institutional, administrative reforms. There is no existing policy framework for the religious sector. There is therefore need to formulate a policy framework for this sector. The governance framework for religious organizations in Kenya reveals a series of challenges and gaps that have implication on transparency. Standards and minimum certification requirements for religious organizations and leaders are critical prerequisites for the registration and monitoring of religious organizations. Civic education and education curricula, critical in sensitizing Kenyans. Reporting mechanisms and enforcement actions are critical in curtailing religious extremism, cultic or occultist beliefs and practices. All these things have been said in the society, all right? But always it comes into that striking that delicate balance between coming in to regulate faith and actually allowing people to practice their faith. There are those that push back and say, all right, so we know that those established entities, Catholics, the Anglicans,
they call Presbyterian.
They're
called Methodists.
Yeah,
Baptists,
and the Baptists,
Yes.
all those, right? When it comes to Muslims, when it comes to Hindu, we can see their structure. But then there's been an emergence of these other denominations because people are just not happy with this structure that's there. And the people who are in the old structure are the ones who are trying to control and curtail the freedom of people to express themselves according to how the Holy Spirit guides them to express themselves. That's been the pushback always. And it's likely to be the pushback again here. How do you address that?
Well, I mean, freedom has been given to us by the Constitution, but it's not absolute freedom. It isn't absolute freedom. That freedom must be exercised responsibly, and it should not undermine the freedoms of other people, the lives and livelihoods of other people. Then it is not freedom, then it is something else. What point am I making? I'm trying to say, when that person asked us at Shakahola, Reverend Musyimi, where was the church? And before that, we'd been asking, where is the government? Then we knew the solution lies in the two entities coming together, the religious sector coming together through the Religious Affairs Commission, create a body that has both entities, that makes it possible for this applicant to have their freedom, but not at the expense of other people. Just decent governance platform.
Top level, that sounds okay. But beyond that, when you say you even start thinking about certification of preachers, so what are we saying? Are we coming up with a curriculum?
Yeah.
If we come up with a policy, does the policy then also say that now we shall define a curriculum for theologians and therefore we shall also certify those theology schools? And is that what we... Is that
Please understand, we have left self-regulation to umbrella bodies, not to government. Government is involved in registration and so on. But much of the work is actually done by the umbrella bodies. And as I talk as a general secretary of an umbrella body, probably the premier umbrella body in this country, I can talk with a certain confidence that what is being proposed has been done and is doable. But you always are dealing with sovereign entities, even you are dealing with member churches.
Yep.
You can only go as far as they allow you to go. But these are matters that you need to put, you need to discuss, and as a religious organization, it will be there in the Constitution. There are things that are in the Constitution that the government uses to either register you or decide not to register you. That Constitution will say a lot about who you are. And then there will be the constitution of the umbrella body you belong to. And because you are a sovereign body, there must be some covenant between you as a religious organization and the umbrella body with which you align yourself. So that when time comes for a bit of discipline, encouragement, it is done voluntarily and willingly and in accordance with, in that space of freedom, but also self-regulation.
So I see this as just drawing a parallel from the matatu sector, the PSV sector. Government says, if you want a PSV license, you must belong to a SACCO. I cannot just go and buy a matatu and ply Embakasi, Route 33. I must belong to a SACCO, or I must register a company that has many other vehicles, right? So if you are a preacher, then you must belong to an umbrella body.
In our report, we have cited matatus. I didn't think you knew anything about matatus, Eric. This is very encouraging. But then you are a journalist, so I should not underestimate. I should not underrate you. So yes, that is a very good analogy.
It's a proposed structure.
It is there in our report.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot to learn from the matatus.
Because there is the assumption that the umbrella body has already done a first line of vetting, essentially.
Yes.
That if you belong to that umbrella group, that there's certain regulations that if you've already passed. And if you don't, then you can't just be hanging out on your own.
No.
And
That's very good to remind us of, because that's what it is.
What we have now is those ones. I mean, Ndu and I today can start a church.
Sindio.
And tomorrow we'll call ourselves Bishop and Apostle.
Or Bishop and Apostle,
Let's take a break. This conversation continues shortly. So what are the recommendations that were contained by the report that was handed to the President yesterday? Presidential Task Force on the Review of Legal and Regulatory Framework Governing Religious Organizations in Kenya. It's a long title of a task force. What did you call yourselves? The Shakahola Religious Task Force?
It's not what we call it. I think it's what people call us.
Okay.
It's what's more important.
Yeah, what Kenyans recognize you as. The Reverend Mutava Musyimi chaired that task force, and they presented their report yesterday. We are looking at what the key recommendations were, City.
This task force reminds me of an earlier one in the mid-90s that was set up by President Moi to look at what was referred to then as devil worship. And they also made a raft of recommendations. The president, it is reported at the time, felt the findings were too sensitive, but the then Minister for Interior, gentleman called Sunkuli, tabled it in Parliament. It was a 114-page document. Are there similarities that you find when you've looked at, or when your commission has carried out its mandate, with the commission that was then set? And when we look at the fact that the recommendations that were made, one can't say, even if you stretch your imagination, that they were actually implemented. So it begs the question, your commission has made recommendations. How do we ensure that these recommendations are actually given life?
If you make laws, you are a lawmaker, and you're making laws in the context of the new constitution. There's something called public participation, which we were in any doubt how important it was. I think Gen Zs have reminded us that it isn't just a performance. If you just go there as the finance committee and you do your symbolic listening, and then you don't implement, there could be a reaction, pushback, and so. The president spoke to this yesterday, and even when we were giving our interim report, he spoke to it, and he talked about having public participation, and I want to believe he meant it. As a former lawmaker, I had thought at some point that public participation would be done by the relevant departmental committee of the House, which the closest I can think of would be the Legal Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, JLAC as they call it these days. And I thought that would be the one to do the public participation on the bill that we have proposed, because you're talking about the bill and the regulations. But I think he's taken a more pragmatic and a wiser path, so that before this bill comes to cabinet for onward forwarding to the House, let it undergo public participation at this stage, so that there's more life, there's more contact between the religious leaders who are likely to be sitting in the panel and the religious leaders on the other side. We have a whole battery of lawyers and so on and so forth. And the point I want to make is there is still work to be done before this bill goes to cabinet and then comes to the House. For now, the parliamentary stage of public participation through the departmental committee. And I think a lot will come out of that. Basically, I'm saying, initially, I wasn't sure that I agreed with the president. Yesterday, I have to say, I did. Yeah, I think there will be much wisdom in in sorting it out between peers at this stage before it goes to the House.
Structurally. And this is where then the, just like Sitting is saying, in that first report on devil worship, there was a bit of sensitivity that was felt. There's sensitivity. It's not the first time that issues of religions have come up and there's a bit of sensitivity, and therefore politicians look at it and they see, where this is a crucial constituency, we do not want to rub them the wrong way, and they back off. Martha Karua, as Justice Minister, introduced a certain conversation, again, around regulations on religious organizations and practices, politically backed up. The then Attorney General, Professor Getho Muigai, brought a conversation, the same, and there was similar pushback, backed off. This time, even if we start now, going to the next stage, there's obviously expected to be the similar kind of backlash. Even when you're doing your public hearings, I'm sure you receive that kind of public backlash in some instances, where there would be people who say, we cannot start secularizing faith. And by saying we are regulating, this is what we are doing, we are attacking faith. Faith is it's a personal issue. And it's likely to have the same conversation.
I don't think we are regulating faith. We're just making sure that freedom is not abused. Because government has a responsibility to make sure it is not abused. Because if you then protect that freedom and end up with Shakahola and you do nothing about it, you are an incompetent, irresponsible government. I couldn't put it any other way. You cannot just defend freedom and live with the Shakahola at the same time. You got to make up your mind. Yes, freedom is there, but how is it going to be exercised in a manner that the lives and livelihoods of the innocent and the vulnerable are protected?
But Reverend, you can see the red flags.
Of course I can.
And those red flags are not even at it's the red flags coming in form of the counter arguments.
Eric, if I give you chicken, you wake up on that table, and you insist on eating the bones, and there is meat, it will be very difficult for me to help you. I'm giving you chicken. It has bones, it has meat. My brother, as you chew your bones, remember the meat. That is where food is. We're giving you the meat.
Okay.
Where would you know that somebody was going off the rails? Let's say the regulatory framework is in place, which is what is being suggested now, probably will be put into some kind of law. How would you know that then somebody was in contravention? What would it be? Because you can't be ambiguous. It can't be vague here. That there must be certain things where we say, look, if the people of the flock, of the congregation, have started to be affected in one way or another, or if you've started to speak in a certain way, then we know that there's a problem. Because more often than not, these religious gatherings are in the public domain. Unless, we have some that are hidden, then that's a totally different thing. But how would you know that this is in contravention of the regulations? And we say, CT and your church, let's have a conversation tomorrow. Otherwise, we can revoke your license. What would be those things that would stand out and would say, this is going south?
In the many meetings we had with the police and the intelligence and the church leaders and everybody, the one thing that came out is the task force needs to name the crime.
Mm-hmm.
What is the crime? And so we did a whole raft in our document. Without naming the crime, you cannot take somebody to court, because what crime have they committed? And so we had many discussions about what is that crime? What is that crime that so-and-so has committed in this faith or in that faith or in the other? And how is it to be prosecuted? What mitigation measures have we put in place to enable that person to deal with that problem before it becomes a court matter, before there are parties taking each other to court? So what I would say is that I think we are encouraging pastorally that within these institutions in their own right, that there is capacity to deal with these issues as sovereign entities of the church that you have registered. You are the bishop, is the apostle.
Yes, of
that
course.
the Constitution assures the person who is the registrar of religious organizations that you have the internal capacity to deal with those institutional, administrative, theological, moral issues. And then we need to be assured that should there be lack of capacity, that the umbrella body you belong to will be able to see the problem in advance. Should that fail, then the red light begins to come on the screen of the government entity called Religious Organizations Commission. So we have tried to provide safe spaces for people to deal with those issues. But let me tell you, you are also dealing with people whose understanding of the role of faith is not yours or mine. And that's where the issue of Govt comes in. You get, normally Govt, it's this individual. So it's around this individual. It's not an apostle with a bishop and so on, where it's a collegial institution. You're not dealing with a collegial institution, the Presbyterian Church. That's not what you are dealing with. You're dealing with one
individuals
person who has total control over finances, the Constitution, and sometimes the lives of followers, their budget, their priorities. It's a very intrusive, becomes very, very intrusive use of faith, which is the problem you are dealing with. So what I'm saying is, go back to the structures that we have proposed, that this church that you have registered has a constitution. Before it is registered, we are assured that it has the capacity to deal with those things. And then it belongs to an umbrella body that holds it to account at peer level.
Reverend, who licenses churches
today?
Yes.
It's a Societies Act, and it has a lot of gaps. That's one of the studies we did. It is the Societies Act, the same society that the same act that registers Busia Volleyball Network in the Matthias.
It's the same one that registers our church with, what are we calling it? Revival Flames.
Holy Ghost Fire.
Freedom United.
Church. So you did some benchmarking trips. You went to Tanzania, the USA, Rwanda, and the UK. And you were looking at, just to see best practice and what those ones are also doing. What did you deduce? What did you see?
Well, it's in the report. I mean, when you're doing a report like this, you've been given the assignment by the highest authority in the land, and you know that if it makes sense, it will end up in the highest policy-making body in the country. That's the cabinet. Then it will end up in the in Parliament. When you're doing a thing like that, you can't just go to Busia and go to Kisumu and that's it's enough. You go to relevant jurisdictions other relevant jurisdictions. We chose 4 because that's what the funds could allow because of the genocide. We felt we should go to Rwanda and ask ourselves how government dealt with the issue of religion, because the church was not entirely innocent. It kept getting mentioned around the genocide story in Rwanda. We chose to go to Tanzania because it's a neighbor. Tanzania there's a lot to learn from neighbors all the time.
And there's a lot of spillover as well.
A lot of spillover, and because it has a stronger Muslim component than we do, they are part of government in a manner, in a very structured way because of Zanzibar. So we felt we should go and see what lessons we could learn. We went to the States because of Oklahoma, because of 9/11, because of all those experiences. And we went to the UK. I actually led the delegation to the UK because UK is an interesting place. I followed speeches given by Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister about making Britain a multicultural, multi-religious country. And Tony Blair came in, and David Cameron followed along the same paths, 2 different parties, but basically the same message. And as I listened to Tony Blair, I think around 1998, 1997, making Britain and basically asking the question, what constitutes Britishness? What constitutes being British? And basically Tony Blair was arguing that it's actually values, the rule of law, tolerance, and so on and so forth. And as I looked at this, and years later, you get a prime minister called Rishi Sunak, who is of Indian extraction. I said, this is the Britain that Tony Blair was talking about, and David Cameron. And now this lady, Priti Patel, wants to be the leader of the party. And the other lady, who was, what's her name, of Asian, we had a gentleman in Scotland, I think is from the Muslim faith, who was the first minister for a couple of months. What point am I? And I think somebody in Cardiff who resigned the other day, who was a first minister in Cardiff. What point am I making? It is, you go to those jurisdictions because there is a lot to learn in terms of tolerance, the rule of law. You are all equal so long as you know this is what it defines, what it means to be British. And once you are defined by that, you can occupy any office in the land. Britain is in safe hands with you because they see you as one of them. I don't know about the subtext, but basically I don't think you end up there unless the society itself
accepts you,
has made those advances. So we went to the UK, and so the point I'm making, you go to these jurisdictions to learn, because at the end of the day, you must be a learner to do this report. You don't come here to pontificate. You come to learn. You come to listen to different jurisdictions, different countries, different peoples, and then you begin you make the observations, then you make the conclusions, and then you make the recommendation.
Which of these 4 countries has a similar structure to what you're proposing?
I don't think any one country can be like another. You borrow a bit.
Anything similar? Anything like a structure where there's a government regulator that is working with the faiths as regulators, that is working? I
wasn't privileged to go to Tanzania or Rwanda because I think I was very fascinated because these are African jurisdictions. I think at the end of the day, you are likely to learn a whole lot more from there than maybe from somewhere else. But those who went tell me that there wasn't, how shall I put it, the understanding of freedom that is there in some of these countries is not the same understanding as we have here, given our very liberal constitution, our 2010 constitution. So the underlying plates, the understandings of democracy, freedom are different. Yeah.
The religion or faith is at the core of the lives of individuals in this country. Now, when there's a public discussion, a public forum where matters that relate to the findings can be had, I'd like you to help me imagine what exactly do we see happening? Because this hasn't happened before. And you're allowing the public to actually consume, but not just consume, share what their views are on this very, very subject.
I have a feeling, I think I stand guided, but when you get to the next stage, even the public hearings we did, I would say the majority of the people who came were religious leaders. It wasn't just the ordinary person from the pew. I would say that the person from the pew constituted a much smaller percentage. You were basically dealing with the religious leaders. I went to Ajir. It was the religious leaders, largely of the Islamic faith. I remember going to Kirinyaga. It was the religious leaders of largely Protestant faiths. In fact, I don't remember seeing a Catholic in Kirinyaga or an Anglican. It was more the more Pentecostal, the more evangelical wing, the conservative, the more traditional mainstream Protestant churches were not in Kerugoya. I don't remember seeing Presbyterians, seeing Methodists, seeing Anglicans, and I'm an Anglican myself. And I have a very strong history with Kirinyaga. That's why I was baptized as an infant. Those many years back, I didn't see the Anglicans in Kerugoya. And so what point am I making? It is a certain spectrum that is much more interested in this subject than other. That's not to discriminate. That's just to state the fact. Yeah.
As you conclude, Reverend, there are many who are hearing this conversation and they are wondering, so what happens next? Are we actually going to see the implementation of this of this report and the recommendations therein? What do you say? You handed it over to the president yesterday. You had a conversation with the president yesterday. Do you see this time actual political goodwill to go the full hog with this?
I can't speak for goodwill. I don't think the president would have appointed this task force. In fact, two at the time. The other commission that didn't take off, unless he had certain intentions. Now, there are those who would be cynical of politicians, and that's understandable. And it happens in all governments across the world. They set up task forces to deal with a crisis, and then it's pushed under the carpet. I have a feeling myself, the Kenyan society today, just looking at it as a student of the society, you have Gen Z, you have Shakahola, within a space of 15, 16 months. Any student of society will have to admit that there is some deeper listening that needs to be done. There are waters that are unsettled beneath the surface, and you need to understand those undercurrents. And then, if you are a leader, then begin to harness them and give them direction for the sake of society. I hope I'm not talking in parables.
No, it's clear.
You're talking like a preacher.
No, it's clear.
Reverend Mutava Musyimi, the chairman of the task force on the review of legal and regulatory framework governing religious organizations in Kenya, has been here telling us about the recommendations that they put in that report that has now been handed over to the president. We wait to see the implementation of it.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.